I'm getting a circle.
There, it's showing. It's recording now.
Eight in the Christian Standard Bible. Now, if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives to all generously and ungrudgingly, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith without doubting. For the doubters is like the surging sea, driven and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord, being double-minded and unstable in all his ways. Here, James is in the middle of writing about trials that everyone must face in life. He writes that we need to turn to God for wisdom in our trials, and he writes that our trials will build our faith. After these verses that we read, James even warns the reader not to attribute any temptations they face to God. This verse seems to condemn having doubts in our struggles. Tripp Fuller, do you think the author's intent here is truly to tell the reader to just continue on to what's next without any doubts?
I mean, I think it all kind of depends on what doubt is. If the doubt is doubting whether God's trustworthy through the transition, trial, and such, then yeah, like that kind of doubt is the kind to be conquered. If it's the recognition of one's finitude, humility about speaking on behalf of God or from a God's eye point of view, then I don't think that's ultimately helpful in trials or when you're wrestling or doubting. In that sense, that's kind of like a proper recognition of what you can know and what perspective you can take. But yeah, I think like in that sense, doubt is intrinsic to faith. If doubt is, am I willing to trust God through it, then doubt's something that has to be conquered. Otherwise, insert sermon story about Peter on waves.
Oh man, yeah, we could dig deeper into that, but hey guys, welcome back to the Whole Church Podcast. We're in a new series. We're doing What's Next. We're going through what's next after some pretty major things, some life events, some philosophical things. And today we're talking about what's next after deconstruction. And we have two guests who literally wrote the book after deconstruction. So I am here with the one and only, the host of Homebrewed Christianity, Tripp Fuller, the juggernaut of Christian podcasts, you might say. And you might have noticed we're missing the greatest co-host of all time, TJ Tiberius One Blackwell. So as such, we bring to you, maybe not a better TJ, but I think he'd be okay with me saying a smarter TJ. Thomas J. Oord.
TJ Oord?
Yeah, TJ Oord. I think there should be an obligation. Anytime TJ can't make the podcast, that I should just get a free call to Dr. Oord. But, we might have to stop being Church Unity Podcast and become the open and relational podcast for those episodes.
That would be a good step.
Yeah, it'd be fine. We can be both. We could do both. Hold it in the open hand.
There you go.
So with that, guys, I'm excited to talk about deconstruction. There's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of fear around that word in some groups. There's a lot of excitement in other groups, and a lot of confusion all around. So hopefully we can talk some about that and discuss what it is and what are the steps after deconstruction. Is it just leaving the faith? Is it just going back to where you came from, or something else? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Guys, I had to do TJ's parts, which I'm not good at. So just kind of, go to the other shows in the Amazon Ministry Podcast Network, do Discord, or go to the store or something so that TJ thinks I did his job well. He won't know because he won't listen to this. So just do it. We'll say I did the plug and everyone will be happy. And with that, guys, you both know I like to practice a special form of Christian unity that is silliness. And for the series, we've done a fun one. Instead of a question, we're doing a silly story. And everyone is finishing the same story. So I'll give you the prompt. Let you guys finish this quick story however you want. Here we go.
How about Tripp? I'll do a line, you do a line, I'll do a line.
Ooh, we'll make it I like it. I like it. I might have to use that for the rest of the time we have two guests. Okay, here we go. Tom, you can start with the first line then. Once upon a time, TJ the other TJ, was playing ping pong against a sea turtle on board a steam engine train when he
begin to wonder about his eternal destiny.
He got distracted in his wanderings and picked up a sea turtle egg in lieu of a ping pong ball.
The egg was hard boiled and able to withstand the paddle's blows as it flew across the ship deck.
But it could not handle the ruckus the sea turtle brought, and the sea turtle slowly realized that TJ had lured him in to the murder of his own offspring.
"Why, God, why?" shouted the murderer. "You're not just. You're not fair. Don't you care, God?"
This has gotten so dark.
And TJ screamed at him, "Look, sea turtle, God can't. Grab a ping pong ball and let's do this."
The turtle thought to himself, "Is this all that is? Am I on my own? If a God's not omnipotent, do I have any hope whatsoever?"
Oh, God.
And TJ said, "Listen, if you just read God Can't, you could become a dual aspect monist and recognize that both the internal story of your own becoming and the material becoming that you're inheriting are known and treasured immortally in the mind of God, and quite possibly could have a new center of subjectivity at the eschatological banquet."
And so the turtle dropped to its knees, said the open and relational prayer, and joined the faith. Amen.
Amen.
All right. It's bad when to be speechless on a podcast. So I'm trying to figure out what to do next. That might be quite possibly the best silly segment we've ever had. That was incredible.
Apart from TJ aborting a sea turtle.
Yeah. TJ did become an evil, murdering sea turtle. I don't know. He became a villain, but it's fine. Every good story requires a villain. Oh, man. So, moving away from sea turtles and ontological questions, we're going to just go to some, I guess you would call this more pragmatic stuff. So, I want to go first to people have conflicting views. I mentioned it earlier. When it comes to deconstruction, some people say that they've gone through deconstruction and that just means that they question something in their life. And some people think deconstruction's the boogeyman and anyone who does it's going to hate God and leave the church forever. So let's just start with how would you guys define the term deconstruction in this context, at least?
You want to go for it, Tripp?
Well, I think it had its origins in a philosophical tradition that it is only, tangentially related to at this point. But culturally, I think it was latched on to a host of different questions, anxieties, and doubts and fears that came up in a large number of Christians' minds for a host of different reasons. But sometimes the quantity or the quality of questions leads to a kind of fragilization of confidence around belief or faith. And so deconstruction became the kind of trending word for what happens when things you thought were settled in relationship to God, your identity, your faith, and such become fragile, and conclusions or things you aren't really sure about. And so that the kind of pop version of deconstruction is like, well, this is going on, and do you want to acknowledge it or not? Do you want to deal with it or not? Is it something you walk away from? Is it something you go through? So the kind of constellation of things that have triggered it for a larger number of people in the present, I think, is sitting there, and then it kind of, this is the word that it latched onto in kind of like more public discourse and such.
Yeah, I like that. Oh, go ahead.
So would you say that the trend kind of came before the word then? Like,
yeah. I mean, most
already happening,
concepts, right? Like most times a word takes a new meaning, or a group becomes identifiable or whatever. The conditions that gave rise to it's there. And then you have this experience of, and I think the reason the word got traction is because people start to voice it, and then they realize they're not alone. Like they're not the only people asking a question because of, say, like MAGA stuff, or they run into encounters with science stuff, or the problem of evil, or what do you do with world religions. And like there are all these kind of threads that we talked about in the book, but the I think the conditions where there's critical mass of people carrying these questions and doubts, and then it's like, what the hell's going on? And then this the deconstruction in the pop sense kind of brought those threads together, where people saw themselves, their own stories being spoken when people told their deconstruction story, where you're like, oh, okay, I'm not alone. And it is this weird, scary, crazy, and kind of decentering.
That's so wild, Tripp. As you're talking, my mind went back. Oh boy, let's see, 30 plus years. I was hired to teach philosophy at a little Christian college, and I got in, and they had already decided that I was going to talk to every incoming freshman about a Christian worldview. And so I was helping them to build a Christian worldview, which seemed really strange for me. But one way to think about deconstruction is the deconstruction of whatever Christian worldview you had, whether it was a sophisticated one or more intuitive. So that's one way to think of it too, which I think fits what Tripp's saying.
Can I use because I'm not sure if this is accurate or not, but I have a silly non-Christian example that might be deconstruction, and you guys can tell me if I'm on the right track for how the word's used. So Disney has a movie called Moana, and she's told by her tribe, her family, all this is the role you have to play, this is the role you have to play, and she's bought into it, and she keeps challenging. She's like, why doesn't this quite work for me? And then throughout the movie, she realizes it wasn't supposed to work for her. So she kind of abandons those original ideas because she questioned them, she looked into them, she discovered that a lot of what they were founded on wasn't quite true, at least weren't true for her. So she had to reform new ideas. Is that kind of an example of deconstruction?
I think that works. I think sometimes deconstruction is more about the set of ideas that no longer seem to work. And so a person might, let's say, decide that belief in hell just doesn't make sense if God is loving. And then their framework will start to disintegrate because they have to give up that. And if they give up that, then how do they think about evil or punishment, and how do they think about God, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's another whole section of people who call themselves in the deconstruction movement, who it's intellectual issues, but they're really tied strongly to harm that's been done to them, oftentimes harm by the church. Maybe it's purity culture, maybe it's particular ways in which women are understood, or maybe they're queer and the church has told them that they're sinful, whatever. Those have ideological elements to them, but oftentimes they're more felt physically and psychologically as harm from a key leader or church or institution.
Got it. Okay. I just wanted to make sure. I know just for a long time I called myself Arminian, and then people told me some of what that meant, and I was like, oh, well, that's not quite what I mean when I say that. So I've gone through some deconstruction, but I was like, let me make sure I'm using the word right before I say that I've done that, Okay. So
I don't think any of us are deconstruction word police here, so no worries.
Well, I don't want to falsely accuse myself of anything. But hey, could you both, I know I've heard it on other shows and a lot of people are probably already familiar with it, but could you kind of just tell us a little bit about your own personal experiences with deconstruction? Because I know you guys didn't just write it as an idea, but it is something that you both actually had to deal with in your own lives. And I think Tripp's talked about some of his on the show before, but just maybe a good refresher. And I don't know Dr. Oord's as well. Actually, I heard it earlier listening to other podcasts, but that doesn't count.
Well, I mean, mine kind of, I never had the kind of, I didn't have a contentious upbringing in the church. It was among the beautiful parts of, coming of age of sorts. So it was in college after 9/11, when you see the Christians in a public space kind of rallying behind military intervention with suspect intelligence, fueled by kind of Islamophobia and nationalism, that I was like, what are my people doing? And that kind of set me off where, you know, I end up thinking about questions of power and religion and all this kind of things that we talk about a lot in the book. But for me, especially since, you know, getting to talk to a lot of people at the book, we've done events and talked on podcasts and stuff. My experience like that, I've had a lot of younger people say was their experience as evangelicals with Trump in 2016, where you're like,
yeah,
how is this connected to what I thought we were about? And are we reading the same gospels where Jesus is in? Because the dots are hard to connect.
Yeah. Well, and I think that made it really easy for a lot of people too, because it wasn't just, you know, there are a lot of, and for myself, there are a lot of things in the church that we teach and then the way we practice. I'm like, I don't think this lines up. But you have a very clear example of people who grew up in my age, spent their whole lives, Christian leaders telling them, we don't like Democrats because Bill Clinton cheated on his wife. And then here comes Trump. We love this guy who cheated on his wife. And you're like, well, that is a direct, you know, like
he cheated on all 3 of his wives.
Yeah, all of them. And you're like, wait a minute. This is completely contrary to the exact words you said. So I don't know. I feel like it's just so straightforward that's part of why I think the deconstruction movement gained so much popularity, because so much of it was within 10 years, complete turnaround, not just around that, but a lot of things like that as well. But Dr. Oord, did you want to share something about your experience?
Yeah, I encountered really good arguments against belief in God as a senior in college in a philosophy of religion course, and I took those arguments seriously and ended up being an agnostic or atheist for a short period of time, and came back to belief in God based on convictions I had about love and ultimate meaning, and then kind of slowly started rebuilding my view of God uh, after having, you know, chucked the whole thing. So that's really briefly my story.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if I was to talk about some of like what I mean when I talk about my own, there's a few moments that maybe would be like moments, but usually it's just like idea by idea. I try to be open to being wrong. Even in the last year, talked to Tom Oord 4 different times on our podcast. I'm like, wait a minute. Do I believe the things I thought I believed about on it? I might have been wrong about some of that. Or, you know, really a lot of it started for me actually by Pete Enns, who was a huge just hero of mine, you know, because I was trying to find an excuse to leave the faith at one point. And I was doing that whole read the Bible till you find what's wrong. And then I was like, wow, there's a lot wrong. And then Pete Enns was like, actually, you're just reading it wrong. And I was like, wait a minute. No, I want to leave this thing. Don't give me something to hold on to. And I was like, oh. And then I actually met Pete Enns, one of my heroes, at a theology beer camp. And you guys can go to Theology Beer Camp 2024 in Denver, Colorado, October 17th through 19th. Use the code WHOLESHIRE, WHOLESHIRE, to see all 3 of us and Pete Enns. It'll be a good time. You can hang out. It'll be great. We'll probably talk about deconstruction there too. So, all right. So then I do want to say, since you guys did write the book after deconstruction this year, what can you tell us about just the inspiration for writing that? Who it was written for? Was it written for people going through deconstruction or for people who were confused about it? And then how should people get their copies? Do you have a preference?
I'll start this one. I think our original goal was to write material that could be widely understood. Tripp and I both have PhDs. We both talk with scholars and hang out with scholars, and we go through these ideas in academic prose. But we know that not everybody has that kind of background. And so we wanted to write a book that would not only point to what we thought was the sort of the major factors in people's deconstruction, but we wanted to do it in a way that people could easily understand, and then propose open and relational theology ideas in accessible language as an alternative, as a vision of God after deconstruction.
I like that. Anything to add, Tripp?
You can go to godafterdeconstruction.com to find out how to get the book. There's also video series it is written in a way you can kind of go to the chapters on the topics that you're most energized by.
Yeah.
So
yeah. That's just some insider stuff that's kind of funny. I wasn't sure we were going to get to talk to you guys about After Deconstruction, because whenever I heard the book, I was like, oh yeah, I want to talk to them. And then I was like, how is this about church unity? And I couldn't quite connect the dots. And I saw other people were, Josh Patterson was on. I was like, well, he's a better interviewer anyway. I'll just let his thing exist and support it. And then we started the series, What's Next? I'm like, okay, so we're doing what's next after all these things. And I was like, wait a minute. I have some people I respect and know that wrote a book that's literally titled After I was like, I finally have the excuse. But you guys have already done like the video course, been on all these other shows. So I feel like this is almost like after deconstruction. So like,
yeah.
after
As you were
did the class.
As you were saying that, Joshua, one of the things about this project, I ended up reading a lot of books written by people describing their own deconstruction and that sort of thing. And a fair number of those books kind of present the problem, empathize with the people going through deconstruction, and then basically call them back to a vision of God and the church that they had before with just some tweaks. And I think what makes this book different is that we actually think the core notions of open and relational theology provide real answers to those legitimate concerns and questions people had for deconstructing. So, for instance, I mean, one that Tripp and I talk about a lot is the one we illustrated in our turtle opening, and that is the question about suffering and evil. What usually happens in deconstruction book is people raise the questions of evil, and then they'll say, God understands and comforts with you, but it's a mystery. And we come in and say, yeah, God understands and loves you and offers comfort, but also we should rethink God's power in a way that makes it so the case that God really isn't culpable for failing to prevent the evils of the world. So I think our book is unique in actually offering real answers to these big questions without, repeatedly appealing to mystery and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. Oh man, good stuff. We're going to get back to the deconstruction talk, but first we have a couple little fun things we're doing with this. One, this series started off as a joke. Originally, I was joking around with TJ, and I was like, let's just have a bunch of guests on and be like, hey, listen, we've already talked to church leaders from all these different traditions, different ethnic backgrounds. We talked to people all over the world. We've done series on church offices, worship styles, whatever. We're just gonna get a bunch of people on and be like, hey, what should our podcast be about next? And then we were like, wait a minute, actually, what's next is a fun idea. So we turned it into a thing, but we still want to ask just for the sake of it. Do you guys have any ideas what we should do next on our podcast?
I think you should ask really awkward questions to people whose identity and vocation are attached to institutions that they know are failing.
Ooh.
Right. So make a denomination head justify the continued existence of denominations as they exist. Get a seminary dean to do the same thing. Get a clergy to actually explain what they do in the week and whether is this really the best we could be using this time and resources? Because so often people cast vision so far in the future, and that can be fun. But honestly, really awkward podcast conversations are so entertaining. And that
does sound fun. Yeah. Ask a church planner in America about literally anything, because we have so many churches. Oh man. All right. Tom, do you have anything you want to add? Any suggestions?
Yeah, well, since you guys are about the whole church, maybe a series in which you could find people who don't identify as a churchgoer or maybe even a theist at all. Ooh. And you could try to tease out what aspects of their vision and way of living that you actually admire and would like to embrace. So, I don't know, maybe someone doesn't go to church, but they spend time in the woods. Or maybe there's an atheist who just has a free conscience and not having to think that he has to always defend these crazy Christian leaders or whatever. That might be kind of interesting.
Those are both fun. We're gonna the next 4 years of series are just gonna be series started by by this series. This was a cheat code, turns out. Yeah. So the other fun thing we're trying to do with this, and then we will get back to deconstruction. We're playing First Thoughts. So I'm going to give you a word, and what's next? What's the first word that pops in your head? You're just going to let us know. So pick a number 1 through 26, and we'll let you guys alternate on who tells us the word that popped in their head when I say one of these words.
7.
7? 7 good, Tripp?
Okay.
All right. Then who wants to start? I'll start with Tripp, and then we'll alternate for the 7.
You get 7 words to talk about the number 7. Is this?
Oh, no. I'm going to give you 7 words, and you're going to take turns telling us the first thought that popped in your head when you hear this word.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. All right. Here we go. Panda.
Kung Fu.
Good one. Tom, atonement.
Confusing.
All right. Tripp, poetry.
Awesome.
Tom, trumpet.
Small Trump. I guess that's 2 words. Sorry.
You can use as many words as you want. I just have to give you one word.
Oh, I see. Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. If your first thought is the entire quote, when I say Beowulf, Tripp, you could quote the whole thing, I guess. It's fine.
Oh, we'll see. Beowulf, I immediately start to think about all the connections between Beowulf and Lord of the Rings.
Oh, yeah. And how Tolkien had the best translation of Beowulf.
Yeah.
Yet. All right, Tom, podcast.
Well, let me give a plug for Tripp. Tripp has got such an amazing podcast, and you're thinking about ideas for future things. Tripp's also an idea machine.
That's
so
true.
Let me promote Tripp's Homebrewed Christianity podcast and talk about how amazed I am at how many clever ideas he has.
Yeah. All right, Tripp, here's number 7, your 7th word. What's the first thing that pops in your head when I say Eucharist?
Oh, delicious.
Perfect. All right. So then, with that, a little bit of fun out of the way, we'll go back to deconstruction. And I know you guys have talked about this at length, several other places, because that's what I've listened to most of this morning while I was working. But what are some of the main reasons that people might go through deconstruction of their faith? We mentioned some earlier with some of the political stuff, or I know you mentioned 9/11 for yourself, but what are some of the other main ones you've encountered?
This is can you remember the chapter titles of your book game?
Sorry.
So let's see, we got the problem of certainty, just how that sets things up poorly. We got problem of evil and suffering, pluralism, multiple religions, that kind of question, the sex, shame, gender, all that kind of stuff, purity culture. We got Christian nationalism, things like that. We got the Bible, because it was framed poorly and handed to them, meaning and purpose of existence. Ooh,
that's good. I can only think of one more.
all right.
There might be 2 more. The one I can think of is conflicts with science related to evolution,
geez.
climate change.
That's the one I forgot. Yeah. Certainty crumbles, pointless pain, church abuse, Bible conundrum, science conflicts, Christian nationalism, gender, sexual diversity, many religions, purpose, and meaning.
You know, what's so funny is like hearing you do that list, and I know what you guys mean because like I've encountered a lot of that and it makes sense. But my first thought, if we're playing first thoughts again, my first thought was how I was homeschooled through like a Becca Academy, which is one of those like, hey, we're going to teach you about how to love God by not believing in evolution kind of programs. And I feel like a lot of the apologetic kind of things we were taught was just how to combat these ideas, like our quick little quips of don't believe this, which also one of the main reasons that's terrible. When I went to a public college, my first biology class, I just failed because I was like, the only thing I know about evolution is it's bad. It's not very helpful, it turns out.
Well, and the things that got focused on in the book are ones that show up most frequently. We did some surveys. Tom was talking about going through the things that come up in memoirs and people that are not academics but are kind of connected to a community, like on social media and stuff, around sharing their story. And it's kind of fascinating, right? Because they're just different personality types. Like, I have talked to so many people after this who the biggest hurdle they have in relationship to God and the church and things is their own experience in the particular part of the church they're in.
Mhm.
Which, if you're someone who kind of enjoys large, internally consistent vision that you kind of just keep updating, the idea that an individual had one experience in one context and therefore dismisses a third of the human race, and the tradition that animates them, kind of thing, you're just like, well, why would you do that with an anecdote? That's just not how they work. Which has nothing to do with minimizing the experience. It's just like rejecting a really bad youth minister who made you feel guilty for having sexual attraction or whatever is like unrelated to whether God has taken up a full embrace of our material existence in the person of Jesus, and does so moment to moment in our life. Like, they're just not the same thing. And so I think for philosopher types, like religious pluralism, science, problem of evil, things like that are the things you get like stuck on, because you're like, this has to be thought through in a good way. Like, otherwise there are problems. And then there are others who their own experience of something, say feeling betrayed by the rise of Christian nationalism in their church, or that kind of stuff, does it. And I'm pretty sure those things kind of match different kinds of personalities, because I have some friends who will ask a question and like I start talking, they're like, whoa, I don't need to know the details. Like, you're just saying that there is a thoughtful answer to this. And like, yeah, you like science and philosophy. All right, that's good. And I'm like, don't you want to know, like, why don't you want to know that it's like reasonable to orient yourself towards loving your enemy? They're like, yeah, I'm not gonna catch up with you. You got it. That's great. So like, part of what happened when deconstruction moved from a kind of philosophical reflection in the academy to a kind of label for multiple different kind of like experiences is it broadens the kind of the kind of stories that are wrapped up in it.
Yeah. I found a lot of the stories I've heard, it's like it starts with either church hurt or one of those things, problem of evil. And it's like that crack in the armor, and then it cascades. And ironically, I think it's because the church uses a lot of slippery slope arguments of, if part of the Bible's wrong, then it's all wrong. And then you see something's wrong. You're like, well, they told me, that means it's all wrong. So then they kind of go through all of it. I know we don't have time to unpack all of them, but Dr. Oord, you have recently just went through your trial with your church concerning being queer affirming and all that kind of stuff. So I thought it might be good if we could unpack maybe some of why do people deconstruct around that idea of like gender issues and some of that stuff that you mentioned.
Well, part of it is that people have same-sex attraction, and they try to pray the gay away, or they get sent to some kind of recovery program that don't work. And so then they're left with these questions about their sexual identity and orientation and attractions, and the common answers they get from their church just don't work. And therefore, some of them walk out of the faith entirely, some of them just leave church. And there's a fair number of people for whom that's their story, but even a larger number of people who are not queer but are allies, are friends and family of queer people, who say to themselves, do I really want to be associated with a condemning church that doesn't even recognize the same-sex attraction of my friend, or can't stand my trans cousin, or whatever? So that's a big deal, for a big reason many walk away. And of course, the critics, the conservative view, they typically think that there's eternity on the line here. So they have to stay pure to what they think Jesus wants of them. And so telling the bad news to their queer people that they're sinful is just part of what's necessary in order to try to convince them to change, or at least be celibate, so that they don't have to go to hell.
Yeah. Yeah. I be a little bit careful here how I navigate. Everyone here on this podcast right now, I think, actually, I know, would describe themselves as queer affirming in the church. But because this is the whole church, and we have to do church unity thing, I do want to say there are also conservatives I know who've gone through a deconstruction, not even because they want to change their belief around being queer affirming, but even just because some parts of the church are just mean. Like, it's not even about for some people, it's not even about the belief. It's just, well, at this point, you're not even trying to pretend like you're loving, right? Like you're just outright being hateful. And that's what does it for a lot of people as well. Even without that whole fear of, oh, they're going to become liberals, there is still a lot of anyway.
Yeah,
I don't want to,
and I would say there's like two different ways I've seen this play out in more conservative contexts, and y'all probably be familiar with this more recently than me, but like there's the whole cultural anxiety of how fast culture's changing, and so there's this resentment that, oh, now I have to keep up with pronouns. Oh, what about these bathroom signs? Oh, there's a guy that's on a girls' swim team, right? Like all those things where you feel, if you are a part of culture that is increasingly the primary one you can demonize and make fun of in public, that you feel you're being left behind, and that there is an implicit judgment just in the existence of a culture that has no interest of even marketing to you, but monetizing, making fun of you, right? And so that generates a kind of energy that, if it happens to any group, is going to be resistant to changing your mind or understanding the other. Though on top of it, algorithms that just show the craziest things to you, like the libs of TikTok or whatever, those kind of things. Yeah. Like you don't on there get the trans Christian theologian who's extremely thoughtful and learned how to deal with their own family, who judges them or what. You're going to get the craziest thing possible, because it can reinforce your prejudice, right? And when you're already in the defensive posture, you're not going to think about changing your mind. And so then out of that, you're just going to get instinctual reactions that are there. And usually the more thoughtful evangelicals that are in there are upset about that group. They're like, y'all are not even acting like Jesus. Y'all just being assholes. Or they probably wouldn't have said that. They would have said, yeah, you're having bad witness. You're being very mean. And so like there's this whole other group who have a more conservative opinion that is connected to how they've thought through their faith. And you've had them on the podcast before. The number of people who the kinds of intellectual questions that they have to dodge, nuance, or come to an interesting conclusion on, that just on the terms of kind of intellectual debate, I find it problematic. Like I would disagree and go, but what about this? What about this? You don't do it for this. What about this? But it's not like they aren't thinking about it, and their conclusion doesn't correlate to just being a jerk. Their God might be, and that might be when I think about their deity, but they aren't. Right. And in that space in the academy, the number of people that have held that is dwindling. Like even the shift of Richard Hayes demonstrates that the like moderate to center right theologians, the ones that think the election might not have been stolen, the number of them that are like, God is probably open but not affirming, is an increasing it's just increasingly shrinking, right? And so I think one of the challenges of something like Whole Church Podcasts is the people leaving those churches are encountering the first group who are just mean and vile and so unchristlike in the way they treat our queer brothers and sisters, right? So and you want to give compassion to them, and you're like, but I have these intellectual questions, or I'm trying to be faithful and I can't go where you want me to go. And so I think the tension within more conservative Christianity has created a church that those being harmed in the queer community can't tolerate 1 out of every 30 of the people they interact with having a thoughtful answer that they struggled to get to, but they can't give them the recognition they want, because the people in their churches don't care what your intellectual reason are. They just are upset about the cultural resentment stuff. And so that is a difficult task if you're leading in that space. It's a similar one, I think, in progressive spaces around different issues. This is something I talked about quite a bit at OrtCon. That was like my big talk was on the way these kind of topics play out in communities. But and because once you change your mind, like imagine like Richard Hayes having sold thousands of copies of a book that justified the rejection of same-sex marriage, and then you change your mind. The thing he heard almost immediately are all the people who were harmed because their pastors were kind of bigots who footnoted him.
Yeah.
Right. So the question of deconstruction and how you're engaging that topic, too often the kind people who will talk just have a hard time admitting that they are running cover for the biggest jerks to the queer community. And it's just, I don't know what to do about it, but I just think it's important to say, like, a lot of the reactions are because of the actual treatment of queer people by the church. And that comes from people for sociological explanations, I think, best around cultural resentment and feeling neglected and made fun of, and which is wrong. And it's our job in more progressive spaces not to dehumanize people we disagree with. But the effect has been, as the number of intellectual justifications against inclusion dwindle, then the burden, I think, has shifted at this point culturally. And I don't have any advice. I wouldn't go to a church that wasn't open and affirming. And but I thought that before I had a kid. So, I don't know what it's like to change your mind on that idea. So and define that to be really a part of my Christian identity. But it's different. Like Tom's story was different. Like I just, but the idea of but I think the bigger problem you can see on both sides when it goes to the whole church is the way we go from honest reflection around theological convictions to then dehumanizing people on the other side. And what do we see in our political structures or in our religious structures is no longer kind of like, how do we cooperate and communicate and get to the best conclusion we can get now, knowing we'll do another one later. The moment those levers of relationship that mediate relationships like democracy or denominational structure or whatever, once they're no longer those institutions are trusted to mediate the relationship, then those same levers just become places to grab for power so your tribe can win, whether it's a Supreme Court or an election or a denomination faith statement, and it's just been playing out. And I think that's the saddest part as for a relational theologian is how it generates people across the different theological conclusions to be more invested in being right than staying in relationship with people, because no one's finished. And if no one's finished, then I don't think, I think it's above our pay grade to look at someone who God gave God's self for while they were yet sinners and then be like, but I can't even tolerate them.
Yeah.
Whether, they voted for the wrong person or love the wrong person or whatever.
Yeah. No. That's good stuff. I know what's annoying, just for one example. And I think what's ironic is a couple years ago, he would have been to the left of me. And now I think he's to the right of me as far as theological beliefs. Because I changed, not because his stuff's changed, I don't think. Trimper Longman III. And it's just so funny because I have talked about his stuff to different people. And I've had some people who say they won't read him because he's so radically conservative. And some people who won't read him because he's so radically liberal. And I'm like, he just lets women preach. That's like, calm down. That's not, but it is hard to find, like, people just aren't tolerant towards people who don't believe in them. So it's nice when we do have people like you guys, or even when I talk to him, who are just kind about it. Like, that's all. Just some kindness goes a long way. I did want to ask you guys, since we were talking about after deconstruction. So someone's encountered something like this. They did deconstruct. I know you guys don't have a super long time, but one of the big things for me that I hate is you have a lot of people who someone's going through deconstruction, and okay, so the goal is to get them back into the church, and like you mentioned earlier, do a couple tweaks or whatever, but we have them back in the faith, and the goal is to just get them back to where they started. And then some people are like, well, it doesn't even matter if they believe in God anymore, as long as let them go through their journey. And I get both perspectives, but I don't like it. Like for me, I'm like, okay, wait, so if they're just going to come back, what's the point? It seems like they're not honestly asking the questions if the point is for them to just come back. But if you're saying it doesn't matter if they ever trust in God again, well, I think the reason I struggle with that is because I truly believe in the divine, and I think it does make my life better. It makes other people's lives better. So why wouldn't I want something that I think would cause someone's life to be better to be a part of their life still? You know what I mean? Like, so I don't know. I don't like either of those answers of what's supposed to happen after deconstruction. So what do you guys think? What is supposed to happen, or what would we like to see as a result of someone going through deconstruction if they are experiencing that?
Well, there's tons of things we could say on this, but I think I'll start by saying it helps me when I think about the question you asked to begin by saying I don't believe in hell in any traditional sense. And I think for many people, that's kind of what's at stake. And the reason they want their deconstructing brother or son or cousin to come back to Christ or to Jesus or whatever is because they think the eternal destiny is on the line and they could go to hell if they don't. Well, if you take that off the table because you think God is a God of love and God never gives up on anybody, then you're okay with people not coming back to faith if they have real good reasons not to come back to it. If they're harmed and hurt by the church, it's understandable why they don't want to go back to that harm. Now, Tripp and I happen to believe there is a God. We think there's a vision of God that's better than the one that people have left. But unlike the former Tom, I don't lose sleep over people deciding to stay atheist after they've left belief in God, because I happen to believe in a God who understands them and loves them and trusts them and never, ever gives up on anybody. And so I have the hope that eventually, when healing occurs, maybe in this life or the next, they might come back to say yes to God. But I don't feel like I have to be the one to force it right now.
Yeah. And I mean, I see that perspective. Kind of like soft universalist is where I'm at now, and that's changed and is changing, if I'm going to be honest, still thinking about these ideas. But even with hell off the table, I genuinely believe a life when you're engaged with the divine, who I think of as love itself, to me is a better life. So I still kind of have this desire. Like, I'm like, don't want to like shove them in a church and be like, no, just make it work. But I'm like, I still feel like I would rather them have the divine in their life than not.
Yeah, but I would just say, like, our book is God after deconstruction, and part of it is because that vision of God, it's impossible to have the God of love out of your life.
Right.
In what way you're conscious of it, what way you cultivate different rhythms and communities help you orient towards the invitation to participate in the divine life varies. And I think a lot of times when this question is framed by those that are institutionally located, it's hard for them to imagine people having kind of deep spiritual resonance with the divine outside the options that have really worked for them and for the people they serve. Right. So part of it's just that kind of like opening of that imagination. But in that space, then I think there are lots of questions to ask people you care about and are friends with that are going through it, and helping them learn to both make sure that they're finding like rhythms that lead to flourishing, help them even start to think about whether or not that kind of resonance, be it say in nature or in friendships or in like people found a deep joy like in being more committed to like local organizing or like all these kinds of places. Part of a vision of God that isn't kind of muted the moment you leave the church is the very places people might find life on the other side of kind of their traditional place, or those aren't foreign to God, and it could be responding. And if you don't take God and the church as synonymous, in their space, then part of it can be helping people to name and recognize the presence of the divine where they're finding life. And the other is, like, there are lots of relationships that have different forms over your own life. Your parents are different when you have diapers and not, when they become grandparents, this kind of thing. And recognizing that people have different seasons, and the same is true in friendships or different things you deeply love. Like, you can not have read your favorite book for 4 years and you still deeply love it, and you'll come back to it again later. Like, I think there's a kind of anxiety that might be eternal conscious torment related, that when people can't differentiate church and God. And so in some sense, we're like, well, God's bigger than the church, and sometimes includes it, I guess. But the other side is the recognition that like God is always showing up. And sometimes it takes being in a different context or space to start to trust that as they move through their life with their little bit of agency structured by their finitude and stuff, that that what they're meeting moment to moment is something they can trust and give themselves to again, because the context where it happened before is so untrustworthy. And so I think sometimes that, like, a narrowed vision of where God is leads to putting a weird pressure on people when, Jesus, think in the middle of Luke, he sits there, it's like, well, there's a lost coin, a lost sheep, the lost son. Like, the whole time is like, like, if we know what God's like, searching until it's found and then throwing parties. And that's so like part of my lack of anxiety about it is I'm not worried about God being unfaithful.
Right.
Yeah.
The next church they walk into, perhaps.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Well, I know you both have to go here in just a minute. So is there anything as far as like maybe what we didn't ask or things that you think would just be important to let people know, whether they're going through deconstruction, know someone who's going through deconstruction, as far as like, what do we need to know as far as how to love one another better and to just be there for each other, I guess?
Maybe I'll just say something that's really broad, but I think really crucial for people who are listening to this. Don't feel like you have to choose between atheism or the God and the church that has hurt you. There's a different way of thinking about God, and there's a community of people who are emerging that supports that way of thinking about God that Tripp and I are calling open and relational theology. And this way fits your deep intuitions. It fits your experience. It makes sense. It's reasonable. It even fits the best parts of the Bible. Maybe not all of it, but the best parts.
Yeah.
And so don't think that you have an either or. There is a third alternative.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
I like it.
Yeah.
I think there are a few shifts in that we talk about in the book that could also be true just about a church that doesn't want to tell people who are going through this process get in or get out, right? Like, part of it is a shift of seeing faith as something that there are boundaries you maintain, but see faith as the horizon in which you're walking. And that shift from boundaries to horizons means that the things that functioned as boundary statements before are always being rediscovered as you go with the people you're moving with. I think there's a shift between seeing beliefs as something you assent to and belief in the God of love as one in whom you trust, and shifting from beliefs functioning in that assent mode, where you're passing a true false test, to a trust one. I give myself to the God of love revealed in the person of Jesus is different. And I think a lot of the deconstructing people are ones that saw truth as something they had to seize and cling to. Now they have certainty. And then what happens when it's all blown away? Seeing the proper relationship of truth less as something that's kind of closed-fisted but open-handed. And so it's in the same process that you are and in living. And to me, that from my kind of a closed fist to an open-handed relationship with the divine means there's a way of kind of, at the beginning, Tom was talking about the problem of mystery, and part of what happens once people start throwing mystery around is it's able to hold all sorts of demons and nightmares in place. But if love is the mystery, then it's like this ever potential of deeper encounters with the God who is love, and there's no remainder. So like if love's the mystery, then love's also the adventure. And so God, after deconstruction in an open relational way, is able to go from boundaries to horizons, ascent to trust, from closed fist to open fist, and do so because love is the mystery, and that's the adventure. And it's one that'll meet you whether you're in church or not. But like part of doing a book where it was about God after deconstruction is it's very different than the church after deconstruction. Because each moment, the divine shows up, whether you're aware or not, and what you're saying, but you don't understand that mystery. But it's the mystery of love, and responding to it is part of the dignity of life's adventure. And so, one of the things I think for open relational theologians and for us doing a project like this is really good questions and really deep pains are places where you get to go on that adventure again, not close yourself off from it. And so like part of presenting God after that is to go, yeah, great questions, great challenges, horrible pain, struggles. Yes. But love is the mystery and the adventure. So let's do this. And
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. I have another show that's all about giving more questions than answers. So it's Dummy for Theology. And I like the mystery language. So I like this love is the mystery and prioritizing these questions and asking them, not being afraid of them. So thank you for that. And thank you guys so much for joining me. I know you guys have to go, so I will be wrapping this up solo, but thank you guys again.
All right.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it, Joshua.
All right. Yeah. And it's always great having Tom and Dr. Oord on. I don't think we've ever been able to have them both on together before. So that was a great joy for me. Plenty more I could ask them. This conversation could go on and on. But I do like the big takeaway of love is the mystery. Love is the question. That thing that Tripp said there at the end for me resonates. And it's whether the deconstruction is around, the gender issues we mentioned, whether it's around, well, why would an all-loving, all-powerful God allow evil in the world, those kind of questions, the problem of evil, all these other stuff that we mentioned, church hurt, whatever may have led to deconstruction. I think it's important that we allow room for these questions. We don't discourage the question and embrace the idea that love is in the mystery. You may notice like some of our stuff, like we are all queer affirming here. All three of us happen to not really believe in hell in the traditional sense. But I hope this conversation, whether you disagree with us or not, is still beneficial. Because this is for the whole church. So if you do believe in hell or not, I think these questions are still relevant. Does it matter? So if you do believe in hell, you could still ask, without hell, is there a reason that I should encourage people to love God? And I think that's an important question to ask. Back when I kind of had a different belief on hell, that was still important to me. So I hope that is still important to you to just ask, if you're wrong about hell, is there a reason to love God anyway? Is there a reason to encourage people to have the divine in their life? And I think there is. And if you're right about hell, do you trust that God will be there with people through their deconstruction, through their questions? Do you trust God to be faithful? So I think those are questions, no matter what part of the church you find yourself in, that you can hold on to when you're embracing this topic of deconstruction and other people in your life or yourself as you're going through deconstruction, that you can hold on to those things that are really important things to hold on to. Yeah, sorry. It's hard to do this without guests. I just want you guys to feel assured that you are loved, that you are cared for, that all parts of the church are important. So whether you're going through deconstruction or not, whether you agree with us or not on this stuff, we hope you feel loved. We hope that you find space to disagree well, and to address deconstruction better, maybe, whether you're agreeing with us about what the end results should be or not. I hope at least that idea of love being the mystery can really sit with you and be a place that we can agree in unity about. So with that, we always do ask for a tangible action. This time I'm just going to ask you guys all to go get their book, After Deconstruction. Support their work. They give a lot of practical actions on what to do with deconstruction or how to address these questions and that kind of stuff I think's really useful. If you're interested in supporting Dr. Oord, or if you're just curious about what his stance is, when he mentioned the queer affirming stuff, when we mentioned his trial with his church, he actually lost membership in that. And I'll try to link below a live thing that Tripp and Oord did on the results of his trial with his church, so you guys can learn more about that. And if you want to learn more or support Dr. Oord, I'll also put a link to his book about his defense for his trial in LGBTQ. He actually, being queer affirming, he wrote a book on the defense that he had for his trial, so you can support him and learn about his stance with that book and purchasing that. And I think if we all do these, we get these books and we learn more about topics of deconstruction, about different beliefs around being queer affirming or not being queer affirming. I mentioned Tremper Longman earlier. He writes a book about the controversies of the Old Testament, and he takes a more conservative stance where he's not queer affirming. He even says he wishes he could be, but he doesn't think it's consistent in how he reads the Bible. And I think it's important to also understand that view. So get his book. I might put that in the link as well. The Controversies of the Old Testament. I don't know the exact title, but I'll put the link down below so you guys have that resource as well. So it's important to stay well read, see these things. And I think if you do read these and you support different people in the church who disagree with you on one side or the other, we'll see ourselves coming together because we realize, hey, we have these differences, but we still have some of the same goals: to love God, to love one another, and to find that mystery and go on this journey together. So it's not just a certainty. It's, I don't like certainty. I love uncertainty. And I hope you guys can embrace that. And by embracing that, we see that, hey, we might have differences. We might not agree, but let's go on the journey together. And I think that'd be a very strong face of unity if we all can get these books, learn more about one another, and just study well. And with that, we always have to have a God moment segment. It's just a moment where we talk about a blessing, curse, challenge, whatever. It's a very weird one to do solo, but I will do a God moment. Ironically, I have been, because Theology Beer Camp 2024 has kind of a theme of fantasy. So I've been looking into one of the guys who's going to be there, Kevin Space of DC Talk, is going to be there. He has an album called Fantasy. I got that. It got me listening to some other albums. John Mark McMillan's one I really like. He has songs about deep magic, and I ended up creating a Spotify playlist that's in need of magic. That's all about this mystery, the Christian mystics, and just kind of seeing not like witchcraft, but more thinking of like the fact that there is mystery in this world, that there is some kind of mystic and the need of spiritual. Because I've leaned a lot into the intellectual parts of Christianity, and sometimes I forget that there is a need for the mystic. There is a need for the spiritual movement. And I've been challenged to more embrace the mystic side of my Christianity and the mystery of it all. Even if Tom Oord doesn't always like the mystery language. But for me, that was a big God moment that I've been dealing with, and got a Spotify playlist to prove it. So if you guys want it, let me know. I'll share a link to the playlist for you. Why not? With that, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend, an enemy, or of course a cousin. We love sharing with cousins here. Go to our store. Yeah, go to our store if you want to see merch like this t-shirt of mine, super comfy t-shirt. If you want, we have hats, we have all kinds of stuff. We have stuff that's Bible verses on. If you don't want to just support the podcast, and you just want to support the church, there's ways to do that as well. We don't want to make any money off it. We just want the message to get out there that Christ brings, that His church will be one. Is always be one. In the motto of there is one holy, apostolic, Catholic church. We believe in that church. Church unity. The whole reason we do this. So hey, merch, go out there. Well, I mentioned before my other show, Dummy for Theology. TJ's on Systematic Ecology, as well as myself. You can get a playlist of TJ's episodes down below. Also, Christian Ashley, he has some Let Nothing Move You stuff that I recently guested on. So check that out. That was a lot of fun. And we hope you enjoyed this show. Next week, we're going to have on Christian Ashley and Niles Merritt to discuss what's next after finding a new church home. Then after that, we'll have pastors Greg and Rachel Hoffman on to discuss what's next after marriage. Then after that, we're going to have Jake Dobrins on to discuss what's next after divorce. And finally, at the end of season 1, Francis Chan might possibly be on. He doesn't know about it, so you got to tell him or get somebody else to tell him. Start an email chain where everybody just talks about Francis Chan until Francis Chan gets the email from the email chain and then agrees to be on so we can talk to him. We don't even know what we want to talk to him about, but we know he's the end of season 1, so you guys got to get him here. Please. All right. Thank you guys for listening. I'll see you next time.